WBZ Morning News. Tom Cuddy, WBZ Sports. Come in. No worries, sir. Bucky is completely trained. Bucky? He's the wake-up call for our communication. Oh, no. One word, sir. Next.
This is Mr. Lawson's own design. He designed this building so that the sun would shine on the back of the cows and help dry up some of the whatever the cows do. This is one of his blue ribbon cows. This cow's name is Fergus. This is his workhorse stable. This building stands today, and I think it's under plans now to be made into a condominium. It's right in back of what used to be the Sunlight Hospital, Green Pastures. And this is a picture of his windmill and his dovecote. This windmill's works were imported from Holland. Of course, the wood was built here, but this top revolves as the wind blows. The top revolves, as you can see in this picture. It revolves to pick up the wind. It was really actually used to grind corn. It burned down in 1921. In the background, you can see his fire station. Just a door of the windmill. If the architect said it needed 2 hinges, Mr. Lawson would say double it. Well, no matter what it was wood or anything, he doubled everything to make it extra strong. This is his firehouse. This building stands today. There's a person living in it. It's turned into a home now. And in the background, you can see the cow barn. Just another picture of the firehouse. How his Rambler roses grew up the side of most all his buildings. And inside, you notice he has his ladder truck, his hose, and his pumper. The pumper's in the middle. Another one of his stables, which was across the railroad tracks, or what used to be the railroad tracks, on Woodland Road. He had 3 stables on Woodland Road where he used to breed his horses. These were the brood mare stables. This is another picture of him, and notice how the roads are well groomed. This is another one of the stables, and you notice in the foreground he's raising his own corn. I think that's corn there. And this is another one of the broodmare stables. This was on the Woodland Road. He had 3 stables on the other side of the tracks. And this is the back view, standing, or would be roughly right at the office, looking across at the 2 of the stables, the broodmare stables. Inside of some of the stables, I think this is one of the broodmare stables. You notice how neat everything was kept. Everyone was heated, as I said before. Another picture inside. One of his pastures. He had 3 different pastures. I think this one was on Branch Street. He also had Central School Field as a pasture, and he had 1 other pasture. He had around 300 and some odd horses at one time, of different ages. One of his blue ribbon trotters. Another one of his blue ribbon teams. Most all of his horses were trotters. He had all different kinds of riding horses, but it's for race horses, and was mostly trotting horses. One of his riders. This is 4 of his stallions. As you see, it says underneath that this is one of the only 4-ring show horses made up of all stallions. So you see his stallions were fairly gentle. And this is Moralma. This is the charity horse. This horse, that any money that this horse won was always given to charity. And this horse was always shoed with an alloy of silver, not pure silver, but the shoes on this horse were always had a certain amount of silver in them. And this horse raced in Kentucky in the big red race. And I think that was the only race that he lost. And that Mr. Lawson blamed that because he didn't bring one of his lucky charms, which happened to be his watch. This horse is named as Bobby Sox and was given away at Marshall Fair in 1902. Mr. Lawson used to ride this rig from his house to the train. Now he would have the coachman and one other man to brush him off. But when they would drive it down to the train, and Mr. Lawson would get up and drive it back to the Dreamwold house. And the same thing would happen in the morning. And he used to race the train down along Lawson Road. These are some of the work horses that he had on his farm. He also did all his own grading of all his own roads, did all his own rolling, and he also had a water wagon that he used to keep the dust down with. This is early construction days, and you note the amount of stones and rocks that he puts in all the places where he's draining or building a new road. Early construction days. He had a street light around every 200 feet. He put up these lights originally with just a plain bulb. Later on, he had a fancy light up there, and each one was grown with covered with vines. As you notice in this picture, this is a picture of, if you look in the foreground, that's his racetrack, and his judges stand is right very close to the right-hand side of the picture. This is looking down Lawson Road at the 800-foot stable. Also, in later years, this is he used to hay part of his racetrack. The rest was used as a polo ground. Also, during 1917, he's very patriotic, and this is his victory garden. He raised, I think these are potatoes, inside his racetrack. He also, at one time, thought of going into the canning business to help the war effort. Another one of his stables where he kept many of his work wagons.
This is the nest. Mrs. Lawson was never a well person, and she had rheumatic fever and was in very poor health actually when they moved into Dreamwold. The activities of the big house were really too much for her, so she expressed a desire to get away, and this was his answer, cottage, where he did a lot of his writings later on in his reclining years. And this is the nest also, after the roses had grown up. Can I make that? This is the workhorse stable that's behind where the Sunlight House was. It's still standing today. And this is the Sunlight House. These later were attached, but not during Mr. Lawson's time, so there is a building that joins the two. These are the gates at the Sunlight House. You can see the Lawson Tower and back. These gates were originally at Lawson Road, where Beaver Dam and Branch Street come together. This is the flagpole. This was from the tallest tree in Oregon. It was brought down around the Cape of Good Hope into Boston and then carried over the roads by teams. It was suggested that they fortify the bridge because it was so heavy they were afraid the bridge would give way. They didn't take this precaution, and the bridge did buckle under the weight, so it held up traffic for quite a while. The upper part of the flagpole you can see in the background there. This was put up in 2 sections and stood 260 feet above the ground. This is the poultry house. The main building where the workmen live is still on Country Way, at the corner of Country Way and Oak Street, and someone lives there today. This is inside. You notice how clean the interior is? Every area where the birds were could be removed and thoroughly cleaned, so it was immaculate at all times. This is the early construction of the Lawson Tower. Mr. Lawson commissioned men to go over to Europe and study towers. This is a copy of a Renaissance tower from the 14th century. The top of this are the bells. Above that is the clock that plays the Angelus. This is one of the early roads, too, on the way to Dreamwold. You'll notice the dovecote on the right and the windmill. You see the roses on every other post and the beautiful gardens that were along every roadway. That's the Sunlight House in the center. You notice here the new lantern, and the vines have grown over the old cedar trees that had the branches lopped off a foot from the main trunk. They were very pretty when the vines grew and covered them. This is one of the cottages you would pass on Curtis Street, and it's still there today. This was the manager's home. Another cottage still there today. This is the sign from the kennel, the wrought iron work done in his own blacksmith shop. This is from the workhorse stable. One of the broodmare stables. Carriage house. Each one had a different wrought iron hanging. Carriage house. This is the door knocker on the horse stable. Mr. Lawson was very superstitious. You notice 4-leaf clovers on here. The sheep were up in the utility section of Scituate, and the house where the sheep were is still on Fairview Avenue. This is Mr. Lawson boarding the Lawson Flyer. He always had a flower in his buttonhole. He paid $32,000 to buy up all the rights to a carnation that was named for his wife, that she had seen and thought it was so beautiful. This was his gift to her. It was later sold at a profit. In his State Street office, this is 3 of his daughters. He had 4 daughters. This hay was used to store some packages for one of the girls' weddings that silver came in. His tennis courts were right near where Dreamwold is today, where the parking space is. In his yachting suit. This is the Dreamer. It was his own boat that he rode around and watched the trial runs for the Independence in. This is not one of the original pictures that we have. This is a painting done by Esther Wheeler that hangs in the Scituate Federal Bank in the office now. He was well known for the seven-masted schooner, the only seven-masted schooner ever built. It was built at Four River Shipyard. You can see it at the left here. On the day that it was launched, they had a band. Local students got out of school for this event, and you can see all the little boats that were there to see this launched. It was named the Thomas W. Lawson because he had the most money invested in it. This picture was found over at Four River and given to us by one of the men that worked there in later years. It was used to transport coal along the coast from Massachusetts to Florida. Later, there were modifications made in the mast, and huge tubs were fitted in the hull, and it was used to carry oil. It was over the first transatlantic trip it made was to England, and it foundered on the Scilly Isles and was completely destroyed. Only 2 people survived. Before that, it was very profitable. This is a picture of the Independence. Mr. Lawson was approached by some Boston businessmen to finance this. It was the first yacht ever financed by one person. It was his offer for the New York Yacht Club race for the United States. It was a very unusual design. This is a picture that we have, an original oil painting here. This was by W.C. Wood, just like the one that you see on the screen. This was later put in a book, 50 Years of New York Yacht Club Racing. And all of the paintings in there are by W.C. Wood. It was a very unusual design, but some of them today are built very much on these lines. And he was never allowed to race it because he refused to join the New York Yacht Club. He belonged to the Hull Yacht Club, and he felt that anyone in the United States should be able to make it. If they could build a yacht that was suitable for racing, should be allowed to race it. This was on the water only 2 months, and then when it couldn't be used to race, it was completely dismantled. The main mast is at Woods Hole, is used for a flagpole today. The sails were used to bind the books, 50 Years of America's Cup Racing. He wrote a history in the back of this book of the Independence, of its being built, of its trial runs, gave a complete accounting of every penny that was put into it, which he paid for himself completely. Other offerings were usually by a syndicate, and they passed the hat and many people contributed, but he paid for this completely himself. Here it is being dismantled. Those are bronze plates that you see there. This was built at Lawley's Shipyard in Hingham. This is the last page of the accounting of the cost of this. New York Yacht Club said he couldn't build it for less than $500,000 to $1 million. And this includes everything, dismantling it, loving cups, first aid equipment, you name it, everything's there. This is the final accounting. This is a picture of early construction of the roads, removing the stones for the fields and gardens. This shows part of the estate with some of the fences. Do you want me to point those out or not? Okay. This here is the Indoor Riding Academy. The farmhouse, which was later Sunlight. The workhorse barn, they were later joined together here, but not during his time. This is the sewage plant. The firehouse. One of the broodmare stables. This is the windmill, the Bantam House, the Dovecote, Judge's Stand, and this is Dreamwold, the Manor House, built in 3 sections. At this time, there was no roadway here. This is looking at Dreamwold from the Lawson side, back side of the building. You'd come in from the gate over at Egypt, come around the back part of Dreamwold, up this driveway, around to the front. This is the main entrance. You notice this middle section here. This is an earlier picture. Later, 2 chimneys were added to this front piece, and that main room there was divided into 2 rooms. The awning, of course, was added later. Also, that railing around the top was added later, so it's a slightly different period. These elephants now are on Lawson Park, but they were in the garden at Dreamwold originally. Just another part of his elephant collection. And this is the front of the house later when the plantings had grown up. And you notice the 2 chimneys have been added. There's a rooster between the 2 chimneys. The well sweep in the front, the tubs of hydrangeas along the driveway. This is the bachelor quarters of the house. This also contained a revolving library. This is the kitchen end. This is the billiards room in the bachelor's quarters. The fireplace, although you can't see it in this picture, has a very delicate design carved in the green marble. It took 6 years to do this because the work is so fine, and it tells the saga of Captain Kidd. The andirons were pirates. This is the library. The ceiling had the signs of the zodiac, painted by Vesper George, who had an art school in Boston. Between the bookshelves and around the ceiling are carved little gnomes. There are 500 different gnomes, and they tell a story. This again is the kitchen end. And the kitchen, actually, the cooking was done downstairs. This stove is there today, had a copper hood over it. The food was brought down in a dumbwaiter. It was brought up in a dumbwaiter, and then the dishes were brought back down again. If you went into Dreamwold, this front entrance where the fan light is where you'd enter, just as you would today. The ceiling is done in a Wedgwood design, blue with white acorns and oak leaves. This is the fireplace mantel in the dining room called the pumpkin room. It has the leaves and vines of a pumpkin, and down at the bottom you can see a pumpkin. The andirons were designed by Mr. Lawson. It's two bears and they depict the stock market. One is eating the honey, the other is fighting off the bees. The mantel, heavily decorated for a party here, shows the Lawson clock, which is now down at the Scituate Federal Bank. You notice he went all out when he decorated. Real grapes, fern, real oranges, apples. Even the antlers on the deer head had loving cups hung from them. This is another picture that is not an old one. This was taken at the bank. There's a piece missing from the top, but it has a cow's head on it. It has the windmill, the Lawson Tower, says Dreamwold on it, and I believe the top that's missing could possibly be either a horse or the Pegasus, which was his symbol, the winged horse. This also is the dining room. Some of the crystal was kept in this cabinet here. The top is molded and has a painting of a peacock. Inside these cabinets today is just as perfect as it was when Dreamwold was built. There are no flaws in the velvet linings. Here you see corn hanging down, basket of fruit. This, of course, was removed. The big window in the center was kept, and that was hand rubbed, so there are no flaws in this glass at all. This was like a little breakfast area in the dining room. And there again you see the garlands of oranges, fern, two large fruit bowls with fruit. On Wednesdays, you could stop at the office and get a ticket and go through the grounds to visit. And my mother-in-law told me that they used to have the silver in that window, so when you went by, the sun glinted off of it and you could see it. This is the living room of Lawson. It was to the left as you entered the main entrance. The left, where you see the wreath, is a doorway that connected to the bachelor's quarters. The pumpkin chandelier in the center was done in the natural colors of the pumpkin and vines. It was $10,000 at the time it was purchased from Tiffany Company. This also included the little blossoms that hung over the breakfast nook area and sconces on either side of the door. You can see the pumpkin motif here now. There were 4 seasons painted. You can see just a little to the left of the entryway. You can also see the blossoms of the pumpkin in the window to the right. Here you can see the blossoms in one of the sconces by the doorway. Looking through the main entryway now down to the living room, you can see some of his collection of elephants. Only elephants were on the mantel in the living room. This has wrought iron from, no doubt, done in his blacksmith shop. Behind this are ivy leaves and vines and little bunnies poking their heads out. Also in the living room, this is the organ. This was a pipe organ, and the pipes were in the basement because they were too cumbersome for the room. Near the ceiling in this room, there's a frieze that goes all the way around. This room was done in the motif of the wine harvest. and that's the wine god of Bacchus up over the organ. There are also pictures of his prize-winning bulldog, cow. He had pictures taken all through the estate by Thomas E. Maher. I've been told that he used to go around and take pictures of the farm buildings from a dolly. He tried to get about everything he had, I think, in his pictures, because you can notice there are a lot of things poked into this picture to be photographed. This is the conservatory that joined the living room to the bachelor's quarters. The tile was imported from Italy. The ceiling is wallpapered with ivy. That light is still there today. This is a painting of Mr. Lawson, probably taken when he went out to visit his daughter in Oregon. Although it could have been taken at an earlier time. This is a picture of Mrs. Lawson. There aren't very many pictures of her, but this is a painting. This is from the newspaper at the time of his death. It said he died broke, but there is still land in Scituate owned by the Lawsons. We would say comparatively broke. This is the design that he had. The Pegasus or winged horse held by the strong arm of a man. This was painted on his wagons, tooled in the leather of his books, embroidered in his linens, and was throughout the estate. You saw this symbol. This is one of the souvenirs from the Independence. This has engraved on it May 18, 1901, which is interesting because he was not only building the Independence, the seven-masted schooner, his entire estate, plus buying horses to start his stable. He had many, many things going all at once. Unbelievable man.
Maybe, Jane, now you could tell us a little bit about what happened to him and how did this whole estate have to be liquidated in the end? How did he lose his money? That's a very interesting story, I think, to many people, and you might give us a little insight into that.
Well, first I'd like to show you this picture that I have of him that was given to me by Brian Ford. Many people think that Tom Lawson came from a wealthy family, which is not true at all. His father moved here from Nova Scotia to Charlestown. He was a carpenter of very meager means, and later died from wounds received in the war. He started out as a boy of 11 on his making his money. He skipped school one day and took a walk down State Street, saw a building that said boy wanted, and went in and applied for the job. He has a very unusual flair for words, and it's very interesting to read his actual account of this. But he got the job. They were quite impressed with this young fellow. When he went home, his mother was not too happy and sent him back to school. But he did work weekends for Smith Amory Company. He saved the tips that he made from running the errands and invested them in the stock market along with his friends. And this is how he started to really make his money. He had made $1 million by the time he was 20. He had lost a good amount of money before that when he lost everything that he had amassed on a stock market venture that he got other people in the company to go into with him. The last $159 he spent to entertain his friends, taking them out to dinner in Boston, and the last $5 was given for tips. This he lost in one stock market venture. He later went on to make millions, up to 30,000, I've heard. Many people think he lost his money in the stock market. He lost it indirectly because it wasn't from actual investing. It was because he felt he was cheated in a merger, the stock market deal that he tried to work out for Standard Oil. He thought that they underpaid him, and he proceeded then to fight the stock market. Actually, he didn't have quite enough money to do it. He was a little bit short on what he needed to really fight the insiders, which would be the DuPonts, Rockefellers probably, Morgan. He wrote a book about the stock market, in fact several, but one of them tells about how they could actually bleed the common man. And because of this book, it was no longer possible to really bleed people the way that it had been in the past.
Well, didn't he, because of that book, didn't the people on Wall Street more or less resent this and say that they were going to really get Thomas Lawson, and maybe he lost his money because of that?
Well, yes, because when he did finally give up on trying to get them, per se, he started trying to go back into the stock market again as he had before, but they just squeezed him out. So that's actually what happened. But I think if he hadn't been in failing health later years, and if he hadn't been bowed down with the sorrow of losing his wife, he never was the same after losing his wife. He was very flamboyant person. They hated him in the stock market. They told about how he bragged a lot, but to the people of Scituate, the people that I've talked to that remembered him, they all really loved him. And that's how we first got interested, is hearing stories that people in Scituate told us about him, and of course because we live right near what was the Lawson estate. People that worked for him gave us wonderful stories about their ideas about the man. He was a loving father, a devoted husband. One of the stories that I think is very interesting, my husband's great uncle worked for him longer than anyone. And when he first started working for him, he was an errand, he did all kinds of jobs. But he felt that he deserved a raise in pay. And he went to the manager and spoke to him several times, and he just was ignored completely. Well, Mr. Lawson used to go around and talk to the people that worked for him often, so that's why he had such a good rapport with his men. He also hired professionals for everything, the best he could, to raise and take care of the horses, the dogs, the poultry, whatever. And so one day, Mr. Abbott decided he'd ask Mr. Lawson directly for a raise in his wages. And when he approached him about it, he said, "Oh, you have a little girl now." He said, "I have 2 little girls." And from that time on, for a period of about 6 months, every Sunday, Mr. Lawson went to visit him at his home when he'd be having his Sunday dinner. He walked to his house, and he gave him the raise in wages personally. Then later it was handled by the office. Mr. Abbott and his wife had wonderful stories of Mr. Lawson, whom they really loved.
The estate was liquidated in kind of a rather destructive way, wasn't it? And it was just kind of taken apart and buildings taken to different places.
Yes, some of the beautiful signs were trampled under the feet of the horses. The buildings were razed. Some of them were sold. There were several auctions where things that were sold from the estate. Some things had never even been taken out of the crates that they were shipped in. Tiffany Company bought a lot of things that he had, some things that he had imported from Europe and from his travels in other countries. The bedroom, his wife's bedroom, was decorated in gold and silver. The bedspreads, one side was gold threads, the other was silver. Those were purchased by Tiffany Company. Her dressing table was inlaid with silver.
Well,
There were a lot of auctions, and of course in his failing health, he lived at the Nest toward the end, and Mr. Abbott told me about going over there to see him, because he was very, very fond of him, and he was with him right to the very end, and he said it was sad to see the buildings destroyed. Many of them, of course, were purchased, some were moved. When he built the estate, he actually gave 2 buildings away that were on the grounds just to get them moved.
and the Riding Academy did go to Brockton Fair, didn't it?
Yes, and
Yeah.
the gates, the main gates that were at the entrance by the office were moved to Brockton Hospital. The wrought iron work was taken down, and then eventually the posts were taken down when they added on to the hospital.
And didn't Dorothy McCall, who, the daughter of Thomas Lawson, who built the fine estate out west, didn't she come here to have all of her children born?
Yes, all of her children were born here. She also wrote 2 books about her life here. I used to correspond with the youngest girl, who was called Bunny, Jean Wickerhauser. She lived in Washington, and I used to write to her. And she was really very young when she left Dreamwold, as they all were. And she didn't really remember too much about the place. She said her mother was in such poor health that her sisters really brought her up.
Mm. When we had a recent meeting at Dreamwold, we considered the last time we'd have a chance to do that. I remember asking Thomas W. Lawson, who lives in Duxbury, and I believe he's a grandson.
Grandson. Mm-hmm.
And he and his wife came and seemed very pleased to come and to be there. And I remember you and Carl gave the program that day and showed the pictures that we've been seeing today on this program.
Yes, they were quite happy, because his wife especially, because we had a picture of his father riding a horse, and we did send the negative to her so she could have it printed. We have had a visit from Thomas Lawson McCall, who was governor of Oregon at one time. He came to our house and we showed him the slides. We've also had 2 of the
great-granddaughters
come to visit us, and that was kind of fun.
Yes, yes.
We
Nice
took
to
them
have
over to see Dreamwold. Of course, they didn't remember it in its heyday as Thomas Lawson McCall did. Of course, it was kind of sad to him to see that it had changed so much, but it had gone through quite a few different stages.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it had been a restaurant, holiday house sort of, scene of many weddings. The ballroom had been added on in later years. That wasn't originally in Dreamwold. Ground be eminently domained. And he did proceed to beautify it. And then he had the monument built, and the design from that didn't go over too well with the town fathers. They said that the eagle on the top looked like a constipated buzzard. I think it's beautiful myself, and I spent a lot of time looking at it. But it was finally done to his specifications. And he had a big party when the monument was erected. First he turned it over to the Grand Army Association, but then he took it back when he beautified it. But when World War II was over, he had a welcome home party at the Indoor Riding Academy, and just about everybody went to that. And so many people who did go had terrific memories of it. One of the men, when I showed it, he said, "Don't say too much about that, because I guess he took a different girl than the one he's married to that, and she wasn't too happy about it." That was Ward Swift, and his wife kind of kidded him about that.
Well, I guess there are many, many people in Scituate who have all kinds of memories of Thomas Lawson and that whole period in Scituate's history.
Well, that's really how we first got interested, because Chubb's mother, who was a native of Scituate, told us so much about it. And then my father and mother are both Scituate natives, and my father used to tell about him riding by his house. He lived at Sherman's Corner, right across from the chapel, and they had a very deep well. In fact, when I go by there now, I can remember just where that well was. And he used to stop and get a glass of water. And the kids, my father said, he and his brothers and sisters would run for the house and try to be the first one to get the glass to be filled from the well, because he tipped them $1, and that was a lot of money for these kids.
Well, I think Scituate is very fortunate to have two people who have collected these wonderful pictures, and so that we can all enjoy them through the years, because this certainly was something that you can't even imagine unless you see the pictures. And we are always so pleased to have you put on a program, and when we do, we're always sold out way ahead of time. So we do thank you very much for all of that, and I think Scituate's very lucky to have people like you and Carl who have taken an interest in this and have kept it for the future of the people of Scituate. So,
well, it's been a lot of fun for us. We've met a lot of very interesting people. We started with nothing, and everything we have has been given to us, a loan to us to take pictures of. So
yes.
we started with nothing. This is Scituate's program. Scituate people contributed to it,
yes.
and we're happy to show them
Yes.
whenever we're asked.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to introduce to you this afternoon